February 27, 2025, the Oval Office, cameras rolling worldwide. Keir Starmer reaches into his jacket and pulls out what he claims is a handwritten letter from King Charles III, personally inviting Donald Trump for an unprecedented second state visit. "This is really special," Starmer announces to the cameras. "This has never happened before." But here's the question nobody in the mainstream media dared to ask. Did King Charles actually write that letter? Or did Starmer's government write it, force the king to sign it, and then present it as if it were the monarch's personal invitation? Because palace sources suggest something very different happened behind the scenes. And what we're about to reveal exposes the most brazen manipulation of royal authority in modern British political history. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this wasn't diplomacy. It was constitutional fraud disguised as pageantry. Let's examine exactly what happened in that room. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer presented President Trump with a letter from King Charles III that contained an unprecedented invite for a second state visit to the UK. The letter, captured by photographs and shown partially by Trump to reporters in the Oval Office, says the British monarch remembers with great fondness Trump's visit during his first term. Starmer made sure cameras captured every moment. He held up the letter. He emphasized how special it was. He stressed that this was unprecedented, a word he used multiple times, making sure Trump and the world understood that no U.S. president had ever received two state visit invitations. Donald Trump was handed a letter containing an unprecedented invite for a second state visit to the UK by King Charles III, but he forced Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer to read it aloud. Why did Trump make Starmer read it aloud? Because Trump, master of media manipulation himself, instantly recognized what was happening. Starmer was using the king's letter as a prop in his own political theater. The king's letter, which Starmer delivered to Trump in February, suggested they might meet at Balmoral or Dumfries House in Scotland to plan the state visit together. Notice that phrasing, plan the state visit together, as if the state visit was already decided, already agreed upon, just needing logistical details. But was it? Here's where this becomes a potential scandal. State visits are royal prerogatives. They're the crown's business, not the prime minister's. The protocol is absolutely clear and has been followed for centuries. The government advises the monarch on diplomatic matters. The monarch decides whether to extend a state visit invitation. The palace issues the invitation through proper diplomatic channels. The invitation is private until formally accepted. What Starmer did violated every step of this protocol. He didn't advise the king. He presented the letter as if the decision was already made. He didn't wait for proper diplomatic channels. He handed it over in the Oval Office with cameras rolling. And he made the private royal correspondence into a global media spectacle. King Charles was reportedly baffled by how Starmer handled this. Palace sources, speaking anonymously to royal correspondents, expressed frustration that what should have been a carefully managed diplomatic process became a publicity stunt for a prime minister desperate to appear important on the world stage. First, Trump had to tone down the rhetoric about Canada being the 51st state, remarks seen by the palace as undermining King Charles's sovereignty in his role as Canadian head of state. Wait, read that again. The palace had conditions for Trump that Starmer was supposed to secure before extending the invitation. Trump was supposed to stop threatening Canada, where King Charles is also head of state, before receiving a royal hospitality. Did Trump agree to those conditions? Absolutely not. He continued making threats about annexing Canada right up until and after receiving the invitation. So why did the letter get delivered anyway? Now here's where we enter truly controversial territory. That letter, handwritten on royal stationery with the king's signature, was it actually King Charles's words, or was it written by Starmer's government and presented to the king for signature? We know the letter was handwritten, but handwritten by whom? King Charles? Or a palace official following instructions from Downing Street? We know it bore the king's signature, but constitutional monarchs sign documents written by their governments every single day. The king's signature doesn't mean he wrote it, chose the words, or even fully agreed with the content. It means his government instructed him to sign, and constitutionally he had to comply. King Charles III sent a handwritten invitation to Donald Trump Thursday to come to Britain for a state visit, even as the U.S. president calls repeatedly for the annexation of Canada. Notice how that's phrased, sent a handwritten invitation even as. The even as suggests tension.
suggests this invitation was happening despite royal concerns about Trump's behavior, not because Charles personally wanted to invite him. Palace insiders have leaked that Charles was uncomfortable with the invitation, that he felt pressured by Starmer's government to extend it, that the timing and public nature of the presentation violated protocols he expected to be followed. If Charles was uncomfortable, if he was pressured, if this violated protocol, then in what sense was this really the king's invitation? It was Starmer's invitation on royal stationery, signed by a monarch who constitutionally cannot refuse.
Starmer repeated this word constantly, unprecedented. And technically, he's correct. No U.S. president has received 2 state visit invitations before. But why did Starmer emphasize this so heavily? Because he wanted credit. He wanted the world to see him as the prime minister who delivered something no prime minister ever had. He wanted Trump to feel flattered and special. He wanted American media to report that Starmer had secured this historic invitation. But here's what unprecedented really means in this context. Unprecedented because it's desperate. Unprecedented because Britain needs American support so badly that Starmer is willing to break protocol, pressure the king, and turn royal diplomacy into a political stunt. In the letter, the king noted that a second state visit by a U.S. president was unprecedented and indicated he would find it meaningful. Did Charles actually find it meaningful? Or was that diplomatic language required to make Starmer's political gambit work? We'll never know what Charles truly thinks because he cannot publicly contradict his government. That's the genius of Starmer's manipulation. He used the king's constitutional silence against him. Charles cannot say, actually, I was pressured into this. He cannot reveal that conditions weren't met. He cannot admit the letter was government written. So Starmer gets to present it as the king's personal gesture when it was really his own political calculation. But here's the beautiful irony. Trump saw through it immediately. He made Starmer read the letter aloud. He showed it to cameras. He treated it as a prop in Starmer's performance rather than a genuine royal gesture. During their meeting, which has since been likened to a scene from the hit 2003 rom-com Love Actually, Starmer presented Trump with a letter from King Charles III. That comparison to Love Actually, a movie where a British prime minister performs romantic gestures, perfectly captures what happened. This was performance art, not diplomacy. And Trump, ever the showman, recognized it and turned it back on Starmer. By making Starmer read the letter aloud, Trump forced him to perform his own manipulation. It was a power move that said, I see what you're doing. I know this is your stunt, not the king's invitation, but I'll play along because it serves my interests. And throughout it all, King Charles, whose name was being used, whose authority was being leveraged, whose constitutional position was being manipulated, had no voice, no say, no ability to clarify what had actually happened. So let's call this what it really is. Starmer didn't forge the king's signature. But he did something arguably worse. He forced the king to sign something that violated protocol, ignored palace concerns, and served purely political purposes, rather than genuine diplomatic ones. The king has a tricky diplomatic role to play in inviting Trump for a state visit. There is a danger that the monarch's reputation is affected by hosting controversial heads of state. That's exactly what happened. Charles's reputation is now tied to hosting Trump again, despite Trump's behavior toward Canada, despite palace discomfort, despite constitutional concerns. And it happened because Starmer needed the political win more than he cared about protecting the crown. This is what happens when a prime minister who once proposed abolishing the monarchy now uses that monarchy as a political prop. Starmer doesn't respect the crown. He respects what the crown can do for him politically. And that letter, handwritten, signed, presented with fanfare, is evidence of that cynicism. Here's what actually happened with that letter. Starmer's government decided Britain desperately needed to flatter Trump. They drafted a state visit invitation designed to appeal to Trump's ego. They presented it to the palace as government advice the king must follow. Charles, constitutionally bound to accept government advice, signed. Starmer took that letter and turned it into a global media spectacle. Palace officials, furious but silent, leaked their displeasure to royal correspondents. Trump recognized the manipulation and humiliated Starmer by making him read it aloud. The media reported it as heartwarming diplomacy rather than constitutional abuse. That's the real story, not the fairy tale Starmer wanted you to believe.